Hello everyone. Welcome to the first talk in a series of talks organized by Redwhisker, which will aim to take you closer to birds from your home in this lockdown period. Early Bird is an initiative of Nature Conservation Foundation, which focuses on producing resources and materials for children to introduce children to birds. My name is Garima, and I'll take you through this talk today, which is an introduction to common birds that we can see from our homes. So, there's a large variety of birds in India, and the reason for that is India is home to a wide variety of habitats, right from dry deserts to oceans and high mountains. Any habitat you think of, there are always birds to be found there. In fact, India is home to around 13% of all the birds in the world, around nearly 1400 species. We have resident birds as well as migratory birds. So the resident birds are those which remain in one place through the year, whereas migratory birds move from their breeding grounds, which could be in Europe or Central Asia, colder places, to warmer places in the winter. We also have migratory birds which move to the plains from the Himalayas in the winter. Among the resident birds in India, there are many which are known as endemics, and these are birds which are found only in India and nowhere else in the world. India has quite a number of biodiversity hotspots. One of them is the Western Ghats, which is home to many of the region's endemic birds. In fact, bird watchers from all over the world come to India to watch birds. Some bird records just for fun. So the tallest bird in India is the Sarus crane at 6 feet tall, and it's also the tallest flying bird in the world. The tallest bird in the world is the ostrich, but it cannot fly. The smallest bird in India belongs to a family of birds called flowerpeckers, around 8 centimeters small. And one of them is the pale-billed flowerpecker. It's very vocal and can be easily heard than seen. I'll play the call for you. So that tick tick sound is the call of the pale-billed flowerpecker. And the smallest bird in the world is the bee hummingbird at 5 centimeters. There are also birds in our mythology, and all of us have grown up hearing stories about birds from childhood. One question that intrigues us is, was Garuda, the Vahana of Lord Vishnu, perhaps represented a representation of a Brahminy kite? This is a Brahminy kite on the right. It's a very good looking bird of prey that's seen in many cities. I'll play the call of this bird. That's what a Brahminy kite sounds like. You might have heard it from your home. Another example of birds in our mythology, Jatayu, who sacrificed himself to rescue Sita, was certainly a vulture, as you can see in the painting on the left. Experts aren't sure about which species of vulture, but they agree that Jatayu was certainly a vulture. There are also birds in our culture, and the photo on the left shows Sarus cranes, which I mentioned earlier. These are birds that are found in North India in agricultural fields, and they are considered auspicious because they are a symbol of love and fidelity. These cranes are said to mate for life. The bird on the right is a hornbill. There are several species of hornbills found in India. This one is a great hornbill. You can see it if you've traveled in the Western Ghats. Hornbills are interesting in their breeding behavior. All species of hornbills have this unique behavior where the pair finds a tree hole to nest in, and then the female enters the hollow in the tree when it's time to lay eggs, and the male and the female work to seal the hollow completely. They use their own feces and bits of mud to seal it off, leaving only a small slit in the middle. The female remains in this hollow for weeks and, in some cases, months until she lays the eggs, incubates them, and the eggs hatch and the fledglings are born. Throughout this time, the male is responsible for providing food to the female through that tiny slit. And then, once the chicks are hatched, food for the chicks as well. Until it's time for the chicks to face the world, that's when the pair breaks down the seal and the female emerges from the hollow. So, when we think of lockdown, that gives a whole new meaning to it. We feel frustrated for weeks inside our houses. And think of the female hornbill at that time, locked into a small cavity, just barely bigger than her body. And she remains there for sometimes months. So, why do we watch birds? Birds are fascinating for a number of reasons. They are colorful and lively, they have beautiful songs. As humans, we've always had a fascination with flight. But the most interesting thing about birds is how accessible they are. They are easy to watch. Even in cities, no matter where we live, we always have birds around us. And it's important to remember that birds are essentially wild creatures, and it's an easy way for all of us to make a connection with nature right from where we live. We don't have to travel to jungles and forests to observe wildlife. We can do it from our homes. So, learning to watch birds, one can do it through two methods. One is, of course, visually, where you look at a bird through your bare eyes or through binoculars, and you observe the physical characteristics of the bird: size, colors, shape, its behavior, what is it doing, how does it fly, what was it feeding on, the habitat in which it was seen, and also the season in which you see it. And those are all pointers which can lead us to identify what we are looking at. But another important way is vocally. So, listening to distinct calls of birds. And every species of bird has its own unique call. And we can learn to identify birds from their calls alone. So, when we first start watching birds, it's perhaps more useful for us to familiarize ourselves with the broad groups of different kinds of birds and learn more about them and try to distinguish them from each other based on their characteristics. For example, birds of prey. eagles, kites are often seen soaring in the sky. Parakeets or parrots have long tails. Certain birds that feed on the ground sometimes have long legs. So, once you start observing these features, you'll be able to understand and identify different families of birds. And then we can take clues from their calls as well. So, why do birds sing? Birds sing to attract mates and to defend their territories, but they also call, and the call is different from the song of the bird. So, birds call in alarm when there's a predator nearby, to warn others, or sometimes to announce food. And each bird species has its own unique song and call. This is one of the most interesting songsters in India, and I'll play its call for you. So, this was a Malabar whistling thrush, and it's been nicknamed the whistling schoolboy. And after hearing the call, the song, you can perhaps understand why. If you've ever traveled to the Western Ghats, to Coorg, and you might have woken up one morning wondering who's whistling at that early hour, it might have been this bird. So, what I'll do now is take you through some common Indian birds and their calls. And all these calls have been taken from a website called Zenocanto. This is a common myna. Um, we've all seen this bird. It's very, very common in the cities, and we've heard its call as well. One important point about calls is that it helps to associate a call with something it reminds you of. You could write it down as a phrase that it reminds you of, or as another sound that it possibly reminds you of. So try and make a note of that for each of these calls that we play of these common birds. And over time, you'll come to recognize them and become familiar with these calls. So here's the call of the common myna. So that was its call, and the common myna is part of a family of birds called mynas or starlings. There are several different species. The jungle myna on the top left is fairly common as well, especially in Bangalore. You see both species quite regularly. The Asian pied starling is more common in eastern India. Brahminy starling, not so much in cities, not in big cities, but a little towards the outskirts. Rosy starling is a migratory species which comes to the subcontinent in flocks of huge flocks of tens of thousands sometimes. And if you've seen these beautiful videos of huge flocks of birds weaving through the sky, they're called murmurations and they are formed by rosy starlings. This is a very familiar bird uh, in our cities, especially. It's a scavenger and commonly seen around human habitation. Crows are also very intelligent birds, and along with the house crow, which is shown here, there's another species called the large billed crow or the jungle crow, which is fully black. I'll play the call of the house crow for you. Again, remember to write down what it reminds you of. This is a bird of prey very common in our cities. It's a scavenger like the crow, and you often see huge flocks of them around, especially around garbage dumps. This is a black kite and often mistaken for an eagle. Many people think this is an eagle, but usually, when you see huge flocks of birds of prey in the sky in cities, they are most likely black kites. Eagles are much larger in size and not so common in cities. I'll play its call for you. Do write down what it reminds you of. That was the black kite. Here's another very familiar bird of our cities. It's a rose-ringed parakeet, and it belongs to the parrot family of birds. But in India, we see mostly these parakeets. They have a long tail and a bright red beak. The male has a black and red ring around its neck, whereas the female doesn't have the ring. So, in many species of birds, the male and the female look different as well. These parakeets are often illegally caged and sold as pets. And actually, any species of bird that's found in the wild in India is protected under the Wildlife Protection Act. So, if you see parakeets in cages, that's actually illegal to do. I'll play the call of this bird for you. You'll usually see parakeets in flocks, especially at dawn and in the evening, making this screeching call as they fly overhead. Now, this is a bird that's very, very common in Bangalore, where I live. And if you live anywhere in Bangalore, you have certainly heard this bird. And especially in the summer, March, April, it's very, very vocal. I'll play the call of this bird for you, and you can decide if you've heard it before. So it has a very distinctive kutru kutru kind of call. And this species of barbet, this is a barbet, this species is endemic to peninsular India. If you travel to North India, you won't see this particular species of barbet. So there are many other species in the barbet family that we find in India. Barbets are fruit eaters. So notice their heavy beak. That's a common feature of different species in this family. The coppersmith barbet on the left top is a common species that's found across India. Its name comes from its call, and the call of the coppersmith sounds like a person hitting metal with a hammer. So that's the reason for its name. The brown-headed barbet is a bit similar to the white-cheeked barbet. This is found across India. The blue-throated barbet on the bottom left is found in the Himalayas and in the eastern part of the country. In fact, in Calcutta, you can hear the call of the blue-throated barbet in the city. It's quite common. The great barbet is found only at higher altitudes in the Himalayas. Here's a kingfisher, and this is one of the species of kingfishers that has adapted quite well to cities. So you might think that kingfishers are usually seen near water, but this particular kingfisher has become quite common in the cities away from water as well, because it feeds on lizards and insects and sometimes even smaller birds. Let me play the call of this bird for you and do write down what it reminds you of. So that was the white-throated kingfisher. Kingfishers are a family of birds with a very large head in proportion to the rest of the body and small feet and a thick, heavy beak. Here are some different species of kingfishers. The pied kingfisher is black and white. The common kingfisher is not as common as the white-throated kingfisher. It's a little smaller, and this is also found across the country. The stalk-billed kingfisher is another good-looking kingfisher, and the crested kingfisher is found in the Himalayas. Here's a species of bird called, this family of birds is called wagtails, and the reason for the name is because they wag their tail up and down. This is a white-browed wagtail and usually seen in pairs. It's also becoming more and more common to see this in cities. I'll play the call of this bird. That was the call of the white-browed wagtail. Here's another common garden bird which has a very loud call. It's called a Tailorbird, and the reason for the name is because it stitches its nest together using leaves. And this bird actually featured in a story by Rudyard Kipling, uh, and in a character called Darzi. I'll play the call of this bird for you, and you can write down what it reminds you of. So that was the Tailorbird, a very small bird with a very loud call. Here's a red-vented bulbul. There are several different species of bulbuls. This is one of the common ones. I'll play its call for you. So this bulbul and the next one are both common in cities. This is a red-whiskered bulbul, and the red-vented bulbul is found in drier areas than the red-whiskered bulbul. I'll play the call of this bulbul for you. So the call, you can think of phrases to remind you of the call. And for this one, the phrase, pleased to meet you, sounds a bit like the call of this bird. Here's another bird that's common in our cities, and all of us have certainly heard its call. I'll play the call of this quail for you. This is the male quail, and it looks a bit similar to a crow, but it has a long tail and a red eye. Here's the call of the male quail. So that's the song of the quail, and quails are part of a family of birds called cuckoos, and all cuckoos are brood parasites. What that means is that cuckoos lay their eggs in the nest of other species. In the case of quails, they lay their eggs mostly in crows' nests, and the crow parents bring up the quail chicks as their own. This is the female quail, which looks different from the male and also has a different call from the male. I'll play it for you. That's the call of the female quail. This is another common garden species called a purple-rumped sunbird. Sunbirds are a family of birds that are found in India. Many people think that these are hummingbirds, but we actually don't have hummingbirds in India. Sunbirds show many of the same behaviors though, so people perhaps confuse them for hummingbirds. Sunbirds also feed on nectar and sometimes can be seen hovering in front of flowers. I'll play the call of this bird for you. That's the call of the purple-rumped sunbird. This is a male, and you can see the female here. In many species of birds, the male and the female look different. And usually the male is more brightly colored, whereas the females are dull colored. And the reason for that is that males, of course, need to impress the female with their beautiful colors, but also that mostly it's the female which incubates the eggs. And so the female has a greater need for camouflage than the male. There are some species of birds in which the male does most of the responsibilities of incubating the eggs and bringing up the chicks. And in such species, it's the male that's dull colored and the female is brightly colored. So back to sunbirds. Sunbirds are a family of birds. There are quite a number of sunbirds in India. The purple rumped sunbird, which we saw in the earlier slide, and the female is here. and the purple sunbird in the lower two photos. These are the two most common species of sunbirds that are found across India. Here's a green-tailed sunbird male, which is found in the Himalayas. Here's another familiar bird, used to be more familiar in our cities, more widespread in our cities. It's a house sparrow, the male on the left and the female on the right. It's still quite common in towns and rural areas, but perhaps has become locally uncommon in many modern cities because it doesn't have places to nest or grain available to feed on. Um, there's a common perception that sparrows are declining, but actually, there's been a recent study on the numbers of different species of birds in India and the trends of their numbers as well. And it found that house sparrows are actually not declining. Their population as a whole is quite stable, but they may have become rarer in certain pockets in very densely populated cities, for example. But they're still very common in towns and rural areas. I'll play the call of the sparrow. So that was the house sparrow. Here's a bird that is becoming more common in our cities and actually starting to nest in houses like sparrows used to. This is called a scaly-breasted Muniya. It's a sparrow-sized bird, also feeds on insects. I'll play the call for you. That was the call of the scaly-breasted Muniya. So I just wanted to mention that it's useful to learn the calls of these common birds because as you learn the calls, they become very familiar and they become like friends. And from the call, you know that this bird is around. So then you can try and look for it because often in bird watching, you hear the bird much before you see it. As you start watching the common birds and you become familiar with their calls, it then becomes easier for you to identify that there's a call that you don't know. And then you can look for that bird and try to see that bird that's not familiar to you. So here are a few resources for kids and for adults, for beginners, that you can refer to when you start bird watching. You can refer to our website, earlybird.in. We also have these interactive posters on common birds, which have the different calls embedded. And I'll just open the poster and show it to you. So here we have these interactive posters, and if you click on this poster, so this is a poster on common birds. This is actually available in 7 languages. So you can choose the language you want. Here's a little bit about the poster. and you can click on any bird. It'll show you the photo of the bird, a little description about it, and you can play the call. So do try out these posters. They are a good resource for beginners. Along with the posters, we also have a lot of print materials, flashcards, pocket guides, and the print version of the posters. Here are also some reference books that you can refer to as you start your birdwatching journey. Then there are a number of resources from Cornell Labs which are useful and interesting. There's an app called Merlin for Android and iOS where you can actually browse birds, and if you take a photo of a bird and you don't know what it is, you can get its help with the identification. And it covers almost all the Indian species. There are also a number of games that are available online which are interesting. Some sites which talk about bird watching and monitoring, and you can get started with some of the resources here. Zenocanto is the call library where all the calls used here were taken from. And most cities have bird watching groups. If you're in a city, do search online and you can find information about birding groups in your locality. So that was it on this talk, and next in the series we'll have talks on bird and nature games and art activities and bird behavior. Do stay tuned to our social media profiles where we will be posting links to all our talks as well as the audio recordings of these talks. Thank you so much and see you next time.